Good morning, LinkedIn. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to Let's Build Daily. I'm your host, Chris Carlin. Actually, starting a special Wednesday edition where we're building workflows with everybody's favorite workflow friend, Stuart Balcombe. How you doing, man?
Good. Thanks for having me. Excited to build some workflows, get into this. Share sort of what's new, what's interesting in workflow world.
Indeed, and that's the fun part right now is there's always something new,
Yep.
especially this week. I feel like I say that every week, but yesterday, association workflow actions, something that everybody's been waiting for a long time. And
Yep.
before we start, sharing the screen for you, what kind of problems have you seen, without this? And like, are we going to effectively solve those problems now that we have it?
Yeah, good question. I just want to give a really quick shout out to Jesse Tremblay, who's the product team at HubSpot. I talked to him a year ago. I was looking back through my DMs yesterday. A little over a year ago, and this was the thing that we talked about a lot of the workflow stuff, a lot of the big missing thing, and this was like if you want to do one thing, like this is the thing that I think a lot of people want. So shout out to him. I know it's been a while coming, but super exciting to see this live. HubSpot definitely does sort of listen on the price side, which is always nice. But yeah, I think that, and I saw it in a comment on LinkedIn this morning. I think the big thing for me when it comes to being able to automate associations in workflows is that association labels are a pretty buried feature in HubSpot. Like, I think there are a lot of folks that just don't know that they're a thing. When you associate something, whether it's company or contact, maybe you just like, primary. Oh, like cool. Like this is the one that's there. It's the one that I'm going to pick if I'm asked to pick. And I'll move on with my day rather than looking at them and being able to use them as a really powerful way to connect, like data or associated data, as the name suggests, right? So I think that to me, that's the thing that I'm most excited about. I think hopefully it gives some visibility to association labels in general, but also gives admins the ability to, make sure that the association labels that they expect to be there, that they need to be there to power all their other fun stuff, especially now that you can use all sorts of associated data in workflows and reporting. I think having the power as an admin, having the tools as an admin to make sure that the things you expect to be associated are is going to be a big unlock. Obviously, previously, if you wanted to do this, you had to pull a third-party tool, Zapier, Associate, a few options there. But we will see, I think, to what degree, if this sort of covers the full range of association use cases that folks are looking at. I think generally there will always be room for third-party apps to figure out the edges of things and enable extra stuff. But I think that this is a big step for the adoption of association labels in general, and gives admins a lot of power to build a more connected experience without needing users to necessarily figure out all the nuts and bolts of how it works.
Yes, agreed. And today, I won't talk everybody to death, and we'll just jump right in and let Stuart, show us what's going on here. Really exciting stuff.
Yeah, let's just go and create a workflow. I'm, probably a lot of in the similar boat to a lot of folks. This is had a lot of thoughts, a lot of to some degree anxiety about the number of workflows that I'm gonna have to go update now that we have all this new functionality in here. Um, but let's just say that let's sort of talk through a specific use case, I guess. And the one that I'm particularly interested in, and sort of built a lot of things around before, but is using association labels in a renewal management workflow. Because one of the things that find you often, there are sort of hacky ways to do this in properties. And even though you could have associations added manually, expecting a rep to remember to do it, or even if you're automating, I think the biggest gap here actually was that if you were automating parts of a process that didn't require any human involvement or rep involvement, and would then present something to a rep that they would interact with. If you couldn't automate pieces of that very easily, it always felt sort of incomplete, and you ended up like having to find a workaround, or having to figure out a solution there with third-party tool, for what was sort of seemingly a tiny little piece of a bigger process.
Right.
Um,
And I think like before we start, like what would you say I think you kind of just alluded to it, but our ultimate goal with doing this and making sure associations are accurate, and now that we can automate, if somebody tells their boss, I need to go update our workflows, or I need to build a new one,
yeah.
and the boss says why, what does the boss want to hear?
Yeah, I think that's ultimately the core question, right? And I think that it comes back to accurate data, up-to-date data, and as a result, accurate, reliable reporting or visibility, right? I think that ultimately everything that you're trying to do is largely comes down to two things. It's do we have an accurate picture of what's actually happening, and can we improve the way that things, or make the way that things are actually happening more efficient? So this sort of two-part, right? Not having to manually train, expect, hope that the reps are adding association labels if your data relies on it, and then two, being able to use that those associations in reporting to give better visibility into what's happening or what has happened. Is particularly
I think the visibility upgrade here is going to be massive, and it's important because now this is what customer platform means. This is what's needed when it's more than just a sales team in the system, and we're trying to see the whole journey. We've got to associate the whole journey.
Right. And I think that is the thing that there's sort of a number of updates here which you could roll to. And I think this is the thing that's a little tricky. I'm curious your perspective on this. Like, I think there's a little tricky in the HubSpot ecosystem with the pace of updates, is that often you get an update which is maybe big by itself, like this one, but because HubSpot is a broader customer platform, spans the journey, often the real power comes when you combine it with other things. So the things that I look at with this particular release are, associations being automated in workflows, connecting it with editable or configurable record views to include associated records, associated data, and then also synced properties to some degree, right? Like being able to make sure that the data which is accurate on one record is accurate across all records that are connected to it. So those are sort of the three that I would look at as being like the, really helping unlock that visibility across the journey.
Yeah, I think this is the final, like not final, but the automated piece that has been missing in terms of creating that true unified view in whichever record you're in for whoever you want to be viewing that, right? Because that's where it was. And I mentioned this when I first saw sync properties. It's like, as soon as I saw that association labels were involved, I understood the power of it. And that if we're not paying attention to what's happening with association labels, we're not ready, for the next iteration of HubSpot as a platform. And I know this update was a reason a lot of smart people had been avoiding association labels, because it wasn't easy. It wasn't possible to manage it, with this tool. So now that it is, all excuses, out the window. I implore people to do it manually at least once first, right?
Yeah, maybe that's a good way to approach this. Actually, let's just do it manually, right? So we can generally is a good way to walk through anything that you want to automate, right? Like figure out like how does the process actually work. So the specific thing that I am thinking here and sort of would like to use this for, and I'm curious, like maybe we just solution this together to a certain degree. But this is something that folks who've followed me for a while may have seen before. The sort of renewal pipeline that is essentially time-based, as you automate moving deals in here when you close a new a new deal, a new business for the first time, and then when somebody moves through this pipeline based on their time to renewal. If they are successfully renewed, close one in the renewal pipeline, you go and create the next, the next period's renewal deal. Great for having records split out by period. It makes it much easier to report on. You can do breakdown of new versus recurring revenue, all of that, that kind of stuff. But the thing that always came up as a question, and historically there's sort of some workarounds for, which feel a little hacky, I guess. As I think that's actually probably just a common theme in HubSpot, is that stuff you did 6 months ago will inevitably feel hacky when you come back to it, because you were likely working around some limitation or some missing feature, some thing that didn't quite fit with the model at the time. But the thing that always comes up is, okay, well, somebody said that they want to expand, or they want to add a seat, or they want to upgrade to a new product during the current renewal period. And historically, the way that I've sort of managed that is with a kind of complicated system of syncing the current renewal year onto the, and actually not even syncing, but this was pre-synced properties. But, let's say that we are creating a renewal deal for the first time. We would say the renewal year is 1. This is the first renewal year. And we'll copy that value to the company record, and then copy it back to all associated records, so that whenever you create a new record, you can say, oh, well, this record was created in the current period is 1, right? There's other ways to do this. You could say, what is the close date of this record? If it's in the current year, then it's assuming annual renewals, then this one matches up. So my hope here is that we can now say the association is current year, or the association is to this this particular renewal year. I mean, I'm curious your just sort of 1,000-foot view on the handling this problem in general, but that sort of is the use case or the approach, the desire to actually have these things associated a little more tightly. Obviously, we've been able to go part of the way there for a little while with, if we just go ahead and create a new record, let's say it's Nexusoft expansion. I would probably, this is always a question, right? Is which pipeline do you put it in? Do you put it in you essentially have new business versus renewing business or renewal pipeline, or do you have a separate expansions and changes pipeline? But for just for the simplicity of being able to see it in one view, let's put it in this pipeline. Let's say it's $500.
How do you usually break up your pipelines? Is it based on kind of the stages, or the different revenue stream, like you just described?
Generally the sort of 2 things that I would look at. One is generally having a separate pipeline for each stage of the customer journey. So that in this sort of simplest form, it would be sales, onboarding, renewals, and renewal. Maybe it's not called renewal, maybe it's called customer success. It can be called a number of different things, right? But it's essentially getting new business, making sure that new business turns into ongoing business, and then managing the ongoing business.
Okay.
Sort of the basic ways that I would break it down. And then I think beyond that, it's, well, do we need a different process? Are there varying processes during this stage of the journey? For example, if you are selling people into different products, and the experience after that is going to be drastically different, then you may want different stages in that next pipeline. Or if you do one-time projects in addition to a sort of standard recurring product offering, and you might have your sales pipeline, and then the thing after that is onboarding to or implementation for the standard thing, and then you have a separate probably ticket pipeline or custom object pipeline that is one-time projects. So those are sort of the 2 things I would look at. One is stages of the customer journey, which often will line up with the teams or the responsible people for that stage of the customer journey. And then 2 is within those, are there different processes that would require you to have different stages in a pipeline because you always want to make sure that you have clear entrance and exit criteria for stages. So anytime the process is different, it gets kind of wonky to try to shove things into the same pipeline. It just makes everything harder to report on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot to be learned in the ecosystem about, successful consolidation and separation of these pipelines and why. And I like the way you just put it, because I've said somewhat similarly, but like if there is a focused revenue effort in a specific stream, in a specific revenue stream, especially if it hasn't existed before, putting it in with the other stuff, you're just not going to be able to focus on it. Like you're not going to have the visibility, and your users are going to be constantly distracted by the other stuff. And if it's sales, they're going to be looking for new business instead of the renewal stuff. And then the operational piece, like, are we required to do things differently internally, like in service of trying to make the customer happier or help them buy?
Right. Yeah. So here you can see, like, I don't know.
And I feel kind of, sorry for the people that have not been engaging with the association labels, because just to watch this evolve over the past few months, like everywhere you interact with association labels, they've been making tweaks and like making the views better constantly. And it's just been fun to see that.
Yeah, the association labels as a filter is now all over the place. Right? It's in workflows, it's in reporting, it's in all sorts of different things. And I think that there's some really interesting things. Actually, the simplest this is maybe a complex use case, and maybe I'm sort of trying to think through this a little bit on the fly here to a certain degree, in terms of how I would actually want this to work, which is part of the fun of doing Let's Build daily. But I think that one sort of very obvious use case for association labels, where you may well want to automate pretty quickly, which is actually likely better to do, is like, let's say that you have a self-serve product of some kind, and you are, you have some record of a new sign up coming into an account. If you want to send email, and this applies more broadly in that specific use case, but basically if you want to send email and you want to do it based on an account, and you want to send it to specific people in that account, then having an association label that is like user, or, and this may be a badly named one, but like some notation in an association label that this is a person who has used the product, has logged into a product, versus actually they're just a decision maker on a deal and have never been in the product, like don't even have an account. You can start to do interesting stuff, because you can automate that, right? Like let's say that you're piping in usage data on the contact record. You could use that as a trigger in a workflow to say, okay, well, we need to add this association label to the contact that they have an account in our product, and you can then use that in subsequent workflows, or in list building, or in like anything like that, to say, let's actually send an email to this person rather than sending, hey, we're going to send, especially if you're doing any kind of like, we would run into this all the time at Arrows, I guess, is like, if you have information about something on a deal, and you then want to, same thing if you have information about something on a company, but you don't want to communicate with every associated record or every associated contact on that record, association labels make a lot of sense. And now being able to say, oh, we see this data, that means that they should have this association label, and being able to automate that is a nice way to do that.
Yeah. And I think like if you're struggling with how to label or which labels to use, I'd look a couple places. One is just like, think about your process and what are the roles of the people, what are the roles of the objects, as they get created, and whenever there's a need to differentiate, what needs to happen related to that, that's an opportunity for a label.
Yeah.
In HubSpot, there are places like in contact and company records and related to target accounts where you have buying role, decision maker. There's already some labels in places that might be able to inspire you a little bit. And then the third thing that I just remembered is like you probably already have properties that are labeling the records based on product type or category or things like that, that I would give yourself permission to just copy that into a set of labels, at least if you're experimenting with this, because that's really what the same thing that property is intended to do, right? Is what the association label is for.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the overarching thing that I would look at is anytime that you're going to have a list of anything, right, like a list of objects, and you want to filter it to a subset, association labels can probably help you do that. And to your point, like today, the way that you might do that is by using a property, like filtering based on a property. And I think the value there is that it becomes much easier to use the association label for other things like reporting or triggering other workflows than the property on an associated workflow or on an associated object, sorry.
Right. And we're seeing like, this is where like kind of, and not everybody can do this. And this is why like, we're doing the show, and, you have coaches and partners you might work with to help you think around the corner. Right. But it's pretty clear that HubSpot is going to keep developing into this functionality. And a perfect example is the associated property list cards that just came out for the CRM record view. Yep. Those are based on association labels. And that's where if you have an associated deal and it has a specific label, that will help you put what you want on that record. If the deal just has a category property filled in, you will not be able to use that to determine what you want on the record, right? You'll be able to filter in a certain way as far as which properties. But I'll just say there's a lot to learn here, but I definitely suggest leaning into it because they're going to keep, developing it into lots of different areas of the product, because it's really necessary to create this 360-degree view, unified view that we're always hearing about.
Totally. This is what I was going to look at, is that what's interesting is this is the thing that I was sort of hoping that I would be able to see, is like if you could check in a workflow for if an association exists, which it doesn't look like you can. But I guess to a certain degree it doesn't matter, because you can just brute force it with the the thing that everybody's actually talking about, which is
and we'll just like, if you can just step back there for a second. So these are the things that we're talking about, right? The ability to create associations, right? So two records that are not currently associated, associate them. Apply association labels. Do I understand that correctly, where it's like they already are associated and we're just giving them a label?
My assumption, well, let's just try it. My assumption is that create associations, and as you can tell, we're seeing this for the first time. We're like, pretty early in seeing this, but my assumption is create associations is like a brand new one that doesn't exist, which is a little odd.
Right. And it's here, it says select a label to apply.
So if I want to associate a company with a ticket.
See, that's where it says create association only without applying any label. which seems counterintuitive, but yeah, I think that's where the difference is. Like, because I was working on this yesterday with orders, and create association is literally just like connecting the records.
So it connects the records with no label, but isn't the default? I mean, I guess you can.
Well, you can do it with a label, right? Like if
Right.
you don't check that box.
But this is kind of interesting that you can say, look, for when there are matching property values. So this is maybe what we were just talking about, which is like, well, I'm not sure. This feels like a little bit of a. I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen when I click this. Oh, okay,
Right.
here we go. It gives me more
Well,
options.
this is where there's nuance, because you can have records associated with one or more labels, right? You can have multiple labels. And then again, this is where, like, if you understand how your process works, you can tweak this to do a lot of really cool stuff. Especially in the post sales, like renewal space, where you're like, I want to announce this new product update to these people, but not these people, right? And it's the difference between they have professional or they have enterprise, or they have this, new module version A versus version B, right? So they might have two labels, or they both have the new module label, but then this one has module A and this one has module B, right? So I think that's probably the need for this separation, where we've got to create the connection first, and then there's separate actions to deal with the labels themselves.
Yeah, so this one's interesting though, that you could this is potentially a little bit of a migration path, right? If you have,
yes,
I don't know if I have anything good in here, but let's see. I thought I had a use case. Oh, it's let's say I want to associate with a deal. I think here I have. It's good when you know the know the properties that exist in your demo account. I guess stakeholders. This, I thought there was a a products field in here, but maybe not. But yeah, that's your point. Like if you have a products purchase type record, or even a I see on a contact record, if you have any kind of notation already of like, this is the person who's going to be responsible for, this is the like technical contact, or this is the, escalation contact, or anything like that.
right.
Being able to select association properties or association labels is going to be helpful.
And hey, Francisco, thanks for joining. What about automating parent-child company associations? So I feel very strongly about the answer to this question, but I would love to hear your take first.
Yeah, let's see. Automating parent-child. I mean, I'm not sure I have a great. I don't have a strongly opinionated or a strongly opinionated take on this. I'm curious to hear yours, actually. If you have a strong take on this, like maybe we can sort of step back. Like, what is the like a real world use case of parent-child? If it's company to company, I'm assuming the way looking at the, we have a parent company and we have subsidiaries, or we have franchises, or we have, if it's school, if it's in education, it's like district and then schools.
Right. Yeah. And this is the thing that everybody wishes, that the automatically create company record and associate button, did what they wanted it to do. And it can't, because it's based on domain.
Right.
But in my opinion, this should be the last thing you try to automate, because I view it as one of the most important pieces of data in the platform. If you are viewing it in this way, where it's customer platform, we have all these different verticals and horizontals in a business that we're dealing with, if you get these associations right, that powers so much of the platform. So like, and it's also going to power like how you connect with other business systems like ERPs and accounting systems, but understand that those systems handle these things differently. And a common example is, this is where like the data models don't match, and it's very important to map this stuff out first. Like in QuickBooks, for example, you have one company record, and then you have like a drop down that represents all the different locations you could ship to, right? Well, in 2024, we need to be communicating with the receiving manager and people at these other locations. And inside these systems, each shipping location is actually an object, but we don't always think to bring it over as an object. So in that case, like the billing is the parent or like the corporate, and then each shipping location is a child company. And this is where even within that, I try to go to like, departmental levels. Like if I'm dealing with HubSpot and I want to make sure, I know if I'm talking to somebody in sales or customer success, or like those are also, child representations. And that's what I mean by like, vertical and horizontal. If you do that effectively, like it just powers so much. And it should be the last thing you automate in my opinion. And this is where I have to learn some, like, do you put the sales label like on the contact, or do you put it like at the departmental level? We'll all learn a lot about that. And exactly, Francisco, this is where like the B2B challenge is that the days of, being able to have a deal with one contact on it, just because you don't want the other contacts to be in the reporting, or like automatically get pushed to the quote or whatever. Like we've been doing stuff like that while missing 80% of the picture, just because we're trying to clean up our deal view, right? We've got to associate people that are involved in the process if we want to manage communication with them. Like that's what it comes down to. And these labels, this labeling system allows for that, right? So great question.
Yeah, totally. I think it's going to be an interesting opportunity for a lot of folks to go back to the process map that you mentioned, and
Please.
also make sure that that process map includes the people who are involved in the process, and probably requires more information, or at least more context about, who are they, what do they need from a communication and connection to these different processes. And I wonder, I saw somebody today posted, the sort of 0 errors type report. I think it'll be interesting to see, and I think it'll be interesting to see how many records we end up with that do not have associations. Because in theory, it shouldn't be very many, if any.
Correct.
Right? And most should probably have multiple.
Yep. At the very least, like you'll have, like the minimum will be a contact record with a
company, right?
With the
Like
company.
assuming you have a company, assuming
Right.
you're a company.
Except for the cases where it's B2C. And but even there, you're like associating them with like a product that they're
exactly.
interested in,
It's
right?
like if you keep the model of pipelines for separate pipelines for stages of the journey, every contact is in a stage of the journey. Maybe with the exception of, or at least every customer is in a stage of the journey. I think probably with the exception of, marketing, if you should, whole other debate, like when do you create a deal, at what point, but, marketing to somebody who signed up for an ebook or signed up for an email list probably doesn't have an associated record beyond the company.
Right.
But yeah, I think beyond that, once somebody becomes a customer, or at least once somebody enters the pipeline as a prospect or an opportunity, they certainly should have multiple associated records.
Right. So we got about 10 minutes left. I'm interested, what do you think the difference is between apply and update?
Let's find out. So we're in a deal. We can
So,
associate it to.
so I see this replace
Yeah, so this is
option.
looking at, I'm assuming, existing associations, right? Like I want to look at an existing association label on the company, and then it has an existing label that is primary, and I want to.
Add or replace, right?
Yeah.
So, man, these are all so close together.
What's really interesting here is that I would kind of expect remove to be
Right.
an option here, but
Yep.
remove is its own action a step back.
Right.
So if I add, it's interesting that I can do things that I can't do because I don't have enough, like I don't have one already created.
Right.
Selecting system. Interesting.
Yeah.
Is that maybe one that I deleted or something?
We should remind people that this is in beta, but it's in public beta, and you can sign up for it in your product updates.
Yeah. So okay. So remove association label. Deal to company. I don't really know why you would do this. Deal to deal. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting that it lets you select things that you can't actually select. Remove existing associate. Okay, so this is essentially backdate, right?
Yep.
Like, which is interesting because it, to a certain degree, can. Well, I guess they removed the like apply to all existing connections or existing records that meet the criteria.
Right.
Okay, so. Okay, so this is actually a great use case for that. Let's just go make an association label, because a great use case for that remove is going to be, whoops. If I go to objects and deals and associations, is going to be, I want deal to deal, and I want current renewal period or something like that. Yes, they are associated. Great. Okay, so now if I go back to my workflow, what I might want to do is say, okay, well, in a workflow, and this is where I think you can sort of remove some of the manual work, or like this is a powerful thing to be able to do automatically in workflows, is you can, and I'm curious your take on this because I could also see it being like a dark pattern too, which is actually not worry about asking people to manually associate records, and instead use required properties to make sure that you have, the property values that you need, like a close date, for example, and then use that required property value in a workflow to say, okay, now we're going to trigger the workflow when the property value matches this criteria, and we're going to automatically make the associations.
Yeah, I think the breakdown I usually have is like we try to automate the non-people data, and we take care when automating the people data.
Right.
Because that's really, and the reason I'm so hard on the parent-child company, it's like, it's really important for the salesperson, anybody involved in the relationship building management, like needs a very clear picture and we need to know they understand what it means for this to be labeled in this way, so that they behave appropriately, right? in those given situations, right? And the more you automate and like kind of, it's like, I think it's necessary friction in their process to be like, no, you got to look over here and see that a label exists and understand what that label means, right? Whereas what you're describing here, it's like if the end game is reporting, and just to make sure they have some contextual data around when they need it, right?
Yeah.
That's where we try to automate the hell out of that stuff.
Right. Yeah, I don't have the property that I wanted in here, but essentially the way that I would look at this is, when you have a deal that's enrolled where the type is set as expansion, which is a thing that you could require of a sales rep, right? Like in the record creation form, you could have deal type as a required property. Then we're going to go ahead and set this association label to expansion, and we're going to pair it with the thing that I was looking for here was what is the close date. It's not going to give me a date property in this dropdown, but the thing that I like to do with a renewal deal is have a calculator property, which is a number, which is close date year, which you would be able to match in here because it would be a number property, not a date.
So if we picked a date-based workflow, would we be allowed to do it? Or is it just because date properties are not available?
I think it's because date properties are not available.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah. I mean, this is why I love doing it this way. Like it's pretty easy to go see that update and just jump into your workflows tool and be like, okay, I'm going to do all the stuff. But that's where, like, even if you were to successfully complete that action, when it breaks for the user, when it breaks for you, you'll have no idea why. And then you have to investigate and, so understanding all the pieces and parts of that is super, super important.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think that this is I'm going to have to play with this, and this is a thing that I'll deep dive on now that, we have this update, and there's, I think this specific use case around renewals is so much that you can do with association labels, both in terms of managing the elements, the existing deals that you might be creating for reporting purposes, but also thinking through, like, what are the implications of using association labels for new things that we may not have previously, that help us better communicate with the customer or better, segment customers for different reasons, so that we can deliver a better experience on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, what's awesome about this is, like, before the last year, we basically had one way to align people on what was happening, and that was copy the data everywhere.
Yes.
Right? Which creates a maintenance nightmare, and it's a burden on the system. I've even heard of like platforms or like portals slowing down because so much data has to get moved around whenever, you hit closed one.
Yep.
Now, like, we have other ways to understand progress and process and milestones and, categories. And something that just came to mind, I imagine, is a use case. But this is where we have to understand, like, who are we trying to communicate with? Who needs to see? What do we want them to understand? Because now we have properties, we have pipelines and pipeline stages, we have association labels, right? So if we want, like, let's say you have a full funnel, sales rep who owns the relationship always, right? And they need to know when person is done with onboarding, or, when they have, done something else in the process. And that's where I think we'll see some play with, objects versus labeling, right? We won't have to say, oh, pay attention to this ticket and watch the stage, and then we're going to notify you. And maybe we can reduce the number of notifications by saying, like, okay, it's going to be labeled as onboarding, And then as soon as it hits this stage, that label gets removed. So now it gets out of these views, or it gets added to the view, right?
Yeah, that is really interesting, right? Which I guess you could have done previously. Like if you look at the company record, right? If you're using a company record that has, you've configured that center pane to show associated records. Yeah, you could use the association label as the filter on displaying that, like with renewals, like what are the renewals that I should be looking at in the next 90 days? What are the renewals that are looking at in the next 90 days that have these products in them? What are the, and I think that will become an interesting point of discussion around like when you use a property versus when you use an association label, if to a large degree you can create, edit, update them in the same way.
Yeah. And on the flip side, being able to warn is always a concern for salespeople or an account manager wanting to know that they're not about to walk into like a firestorm because they just called tech support and now you're coming to ask me for like a renewal and you don't even know that this thing happened, right? Making that stuff visible and saying like, you'll see this on your contact record if the label matches like in support or something like that.
Yeah.
But then as soon as they and this is what cuts down on like if you can handle this in an automated way, maybe the ticket creates the support label, but then it gets handled right away and then the label comes off,
right?
And now the sales guy doesn't even need to worry about it, right?
Yeah.
So those are some wins I think we're going to see. And again, you have to understand your process pretty intimately, both from internally and what the customer is going to experience. But this is the kind of stuff, what we're actually enabling is stuff you've always wanted to do,
Right.
but didn't do at all because it was a lot of work or it was clunky or, you couldn't maintain it.
Yep.
Now, like, kind of like refresh. And this is the whole switch from like point solution to customer platform. Like, if you can refresh the way you look at some of this stuff, no matter how many times you've asked before and somebody told you it couldn't be done, like take a new look. Association labels especially are powering a lot of new functionality that we've all wanted for a long time. And if we get that piece right, it's going to have, powerful positive consequences, both from a cleanliness of data perspective, but also like a visibility and, user adoption perspective too.
Totally.
So, well, we'll continue, the conversation next week. And look forward to, there's so much to dig in here.
Totally.
And I love being able to take the time to dive into the details because the details are what, especially when it comes to automation, like, and honestly, this is why I'm lacking in this knowledge department is that usually there's so much other stuff companies need to handle before they even touch the workflows tool. But we're going to take it from the perspective of, automating where we can, helping you walk through some manual process and some manual process improvements along the way. And I think we're going to have a blast doing it, Stuart.
Yeah, totally. I have to jump on the call, but super excited to make this a regular thing on Wednesday mornings.
Awesome. Well, until we see you next week, check out the workflows and check out this association labels update, find the opportunity, and let's grow. Have a great day, everybody.
See you, everyone.